Today's reading is At One by Victoria Stafford. And I would like to thank Reverends Christine and Brigitte for handling me with such love and tenderness at this tremendously difficult time in my life and in the lives of our family. Imagine this. On the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, every fall, every year, the people make their peace with anyone they have wronged or slighted or injured or in any way neglected in the past 12 months. The task is not to patch things up, smooth things over, reach a compromise, or sweep mistakes and uneasy memories under the rug. The task is not to feel better. The task is ownership. The goal is truth for its own redemptive sake. I did this. I said this to you, and it was wrong. I neglected this. I botched this. I betrayed you thusly. I demeaned you, whether you ever knew it or not. This is the truth in which both of us are living. I ask you to forgive me. Imagine how many deep breaths you would need to take. Imagine how many doors you'd have to knock on, how many phone calls you'd have to make, how many letters, how many lunches and coffees, how many awkward moments with your children and your parents and with strangers, that cashier to whom you spoke so sharply. Awkward is irrelevant. The task is not about comfort. It is about truth, about wholeness and holiness, restoration. Imagine this. Someone has been preparing all year to speak with you, to write to you, to ask you a hard question. Perhaps in some way not quite conscious, you have even known this, and you have been preparing too. Finally, you answer the door or the phone or open the letter with shaky hands, and there it is, what you thought you've been longing for but really have dreaded. Someone is asking your forgiveness. The task is not about comfort. It is about truth. Awkward is irrelevant. You get to choose now. You have to choose whether and how you will participate in restoration. Abandon the pleasant piety that claims knee-jerk forgiveness as the unquestioned moral course. You get to choose which way will be right in this case, between you as persons and with all your gods. What response will make the world more whole? Imagine something yearns in us to come round right. Something creaky, rusty, heavy, almost calcified within us tries, in spite of us and all of our fears and self-deceptions, to turn and creak and turn again and come around a little truer. Something in us stretches toward conversion. Imagine healing wholly from within.
I did have a career before ministry. And in that career, one of my mentors, her name was Ellen Gladstein, still is Ellen Gladstein. She taught me how to be a professional facilitator. She was in charge of my training, gently guiding me to bring out my own style while also teaching me the elements of facilitation that were non-negotiable. She was a brilliant facilitator, one who could delicately guide clients to the outcome they desired while leaving them imagining that they had done it all themselves. She could be brash and abrupt herself at times, and she could also be charming and kind. I liked her, I respected her, and I was a bit intimidated by her. Among many of her identities, she was also Jewish. The Jewish holidays were very important to her and her family. I didn't know exactly what her family traditions were, but I knew that she had strict rules about when she could and couldn't work around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I was surprised to see her in the office one day between the two holidays. She came into my office and closed the door. She said she was nervous, and she looked it. She was here to talk with one of the owners of the company, who could be just as brash and abrupt as herself, and who butted heads with her often. She said that she was there as part of her atonement ritual, of taking inventory of all the wrongs she had done over the year and to acknowledge them and do the work to do it right. I was like, what? You can do that? You want to do that? That sounds scary as hell. And with him? And you? And yeah, I was nervous for her too. I was not entitled to receive the rundown of what was said, how it went, or what came from it. That wasn't any of my business. But the fact that she did it at all made a big impression on me. And the fact that her faith called her to do it made an even bigger one. And the fact that she had the commitment to her faith and the courage to live into it made me respect her even more. Now, I grew up Protestant Christian, not Jewish, but I do remember many aspects of confession, atonement, and absolution in my childhood. Anyone else have any such memories? I remember the prayers where we asked for forgiveness, the Lord's Prayer being the main one. I remember my Catholic friends who went into a little booth for confession with 2 doors, and I remember them coming out with a list of things that they had to say or do to make it better. I remember the number of sermons and prayers and bumper stickers and such naming me as a sinner and calling me to atone for it in a multitude of ways. Most of them meant asking a higher power for forgiveness and waiting until that higher being judged me and then granted it to me or didn't. Honestly, it was one of the things that I was grateful to get rid of when I left Christianity and became a Unitarian Universalist. I let go of original sin completely and wholeheartedly embraced that each and every one of us is full of worthiness and dignity from the moment that we are born until the moment that we die and beyond. I let go of the idea that I needed to reach out to a deity figure outside of myself and subject myself to judgment or ask for forgiveness. That act became something that I had to do myself in order to be in relationship with myself or with somebody else. I completely rejected the idea of absolution, that someone else, whether it be a deity out there or a religious professional, can absolve me of my wrongdoings. Admittedly, I was quite pleased with my decision to be so enlightened as to be relieved of that burden of atonement. Except that I didn't do it myself. I did it in relationships, but only when I really had to, like when I was clearly wrong and when I wanted to be in that relationship, so I had to come back and say, yeah, I really screwed up, I'm sorry. Or when my conscience was bugging me so much that I was like, yeah, I really should own up to this. But I really didn't have it as any other practice. I did it only when I had to. I threw out the baby with the bathwater, as that horrible expression goes that I'm going to use several times this morning. I had lost the spiritual practice of looking at where I'd come up short and dedicating myself to trying to make it right. I had thrown out absolution that someone out there could absolve me, but I never replaced it with the true art of atonement, examining myself with a dedication to reconciliation where needed. And it's not just me. Our whole Unitarian Universalist denomination did that. Many of you know that the Unitarians and the Universalists both historically come from progressive Christianity. Universalists in particular had a progressive take on Christianity that all souls were saved. None were condemned to hell, but forgiveness and atonement were still a core part of their belief system. A few years ago, UU musician Jason Shelton did a quick study of Unitarian Universalist hymnals to trace the presence of liturgies of confession and repentance over time. He cast a wide net, anything that related to community or individual willingness to explore our moral challenges. It turns out that in our 1937 hymnal, there were numerous liturgical readings, responsive readings, and hymns that, quote, drew us into acknowledging our shortcomings and compel a motion forward and towards our better selves. Here's one of the liturgies from 1937, remember. Before the wonders of life, we acknowledge our failures to see and to revere. Before the sanctities of life, we are ashamed of our disrespects and indignities. Before the gifts of life, we own that we have made choices of lesser goods. And here today, seek the gifts of the Spirit. Before the heroisms of life, we would be enlarged to new devotion. But then came the revised hymnal of 1964, the one that came just after the Unitarians and the Universalists merged in 1961 in the midst of the humanist and the modernists movements. And do you know how many prayers of confession, theistic, atheistic, or otherwise there were? 0. 0. Liturgically speaking, by 1964, we were on our own. Baby gone, with bathwater. Nancy MacDonald Ladd is a Unitarian Universalist minister in the Fairfax, Virginia area and author of After the Good News, Progressive Faith Beyond Optimism. It's a terrific book that Brigitte gave me about how our theology needs to go beyond the optimism of humans, that humans are just inherently good, and that we need to really struggle with some of the messier parts of life. She puts an entire chapter on atonement as one of the practices that we need to reclaim. She said that, quote, right about the same time that the Unitarian Universalists forgot how to atone as part of the collective spiritual life of our churches, we also seem to forget that a deep and difficult existence reckoning is important in the work of the church itself. We got so busy living life each Sunday that we forgot to authentically examine it. Atonement is complicated and messy and risky work. It requires trust and moving outside of ourselves to create authentic relationships. But it is also a way to create real meaning inside of ourselves. In order to be in those authentic relationships, we need to acknowledge that sometimes we are not our best. And the result is a deeper and more meaningful understanding of ourselves and each other. MacDonald Ladd invokes the Jewish High Holy Days and reminds us that, quote, atonement can be the very beginning of a new kind of freedom. Freedom from guilt and shame, replaced by honest reckoning and active commitment. She quotes Rabbi Lawrence Kushner and says that instead of turning our backs on our wrongdoing, we are called to look directly at and find the new life that waits right there within our dust and ashes. Rabbi Kushner says that at the time of atonement, we go down into ourselves with a flashlight, looking for the evil we have intended or done, not to excise it as if it were some alien growth, but rather to discover the holy spark within it. MacDonald Ladd says we have the opportunity to look back to some of our past religious practices that hold us accountable to lament and atonement and right relationship. Rob Eller Isaacs, who wrote the words of the meditation that we just sang earlier, believed it was the role of the congregation to create settings for this complex and meaningful work. So where do we find those for ourselves? How do we care for the baby amidst the bathwater and reclaim the rituals of atonement? Is that up to just me as your minister? Maybe some. But also, how do we work that into our daily life or yearly reflection? I'll tell you one place outside of the church where atonement is a key ritual: in recovery groups, especially those that use the 12 steps. I see a number of you smiling. It's like, oh, I've done this work. The 9th step calls those in recovery to, quote, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. The Guardian Recovery Network explains step 9 thusly. In step 9, we make amends to the individuals and institutions we have harmed. And amends is not merely a verbal apology. It is both an admission of wrongdoing and the sincere intention to change the behavior in ourselves that caused such harm. Amends can come in many forms. They can be a sit-down and apology, an honest, heartfelt letter, a financial reimbursement, an act of service, or what is called a living amends, an agreement to live differently in the future. The amends process can be a very healing process for both ourselves and our loved ones. By cleaning our side of the street, we will find new self-confidence, a sense of integrity, and intimacy with others. So let me be perfectly clear. Atonement is not about bashing ourselves or making us feel bad or just going, oh, I'm so terrible, I'm so sorry. That's passive-aggressive atonement, and it doesn't help, right? It is not about feeling guilty or ashamed. Nor is it the half-hearted apologies that politicians and celebrities give when they've found to be hypocritical, and they do it just because their PR person tells them that they have to do it for their reputation. No, it's something much deeper and authentic. It is about looking at how we human our way through life. It is recognizing with both grace and humility that we are not perfect. Surprise, we're not, which is realistic and reasonable. It is not just about looking inwards. Instead, it is about looking outwardly towards our relationships and seeing where we can make them more authentic and where we can learn more about ourselves in a truly authentic way and honestly. In the days of the Jewish days of awe and atonement, some Jews go through this process with the hope that when they stand before God and have Him judge them, they will be judged favorably because they have done this work. More progressive Jews may not believe that the judgment moment happens outside there or even are doing it for an external God, but for their own sense of internal morality. But it is part of their liturgical year nonetheless, a critical part of what it means to be a person of the Jewish faith and tradition. Maybe we can find an authentic way to bring that back to our senses of being. Maybe it is a holy child we can reclaim from the dirty bathwater of our religious pasts. Maybe it is a tool for living more holistically. And maybe it is a way to have more authentic relationships with each other. Maybe. May it be.